perhaps not completely welcome. Food has changed in part because families have changed. I started teaching sociology about 35 years ago. And right when I first started teaching, an article came out in which a sociologist said that increased female labor force participation would be the primary sociological fact of the 20th century. And I think it's an argument you can make. Everything changes when we went from a norm, which was only a norm in part of society, and I understand that. There were plenty of households in which both parents worked, plenty of households in which there were single parents working, but the society was organized around the two-parent household with one breadwinner and one homemaker. And when we shifted so that that became an unusual rather than a normal circumstance, everything changed in our families. And part of what changed was the time available for food preparation. And this has contributed to a major evolution in the direction of snack foods. I have to read this because I just, it educated me so thoroughly. And for those of you who might be thinking of research careers, might be thinking that college is pretty great and you might want to do it forever, right, John? That's kind of, you want to know how people become college professors. It's because they love but anyway, if you're thinking about that, I want to tell you that there are a lot of accidents that go into writing a book. I hope you've had a few in the process of writing your term papers, fortunate accidents, but this was one. Someone posted this quote on a listserv that I'm part of, and it was a press release from something called Information Resources, Inc., or IRI. So in 2003, IRI unveiled the findings of a study entitled, "What Do Americans Really Eat?" to a group of more than 600 industry professionals from the consumer packaged goods industry. According to a press release that accompanied the presentation, quote, "Ready-to-eat snack products with strong convenience benefits are fulfilling the demand for snacks and meal replacements for on-the-go consumers." The release quotes the division president of Worldwide Innovation, makes me nervous to me anyway, for IRI. "These study findings directly support the unprecedented change the snacking industry is experiencing as consumers increase their pace of life." Commenting on an opportunity for manufacturers to, quote, "completely redefine the American diet," Weil noted that, to a large degree, snacks and meals have become interchangeable. The press release drove home the point, quote, "According to the study, snacking is ubiquitous and, in fact, is replacing meals to a large extent. Speed and preparation ease are overwhelmingly rated as the top considerations in the food selection process. Portability and ease of consumption are also important." That's that handheld. So food is changing. I mean, food is changing whether school food changes or not. And it wouldn't be realistic to expect school food to somehow or other be exempt from these processes that are pervading our society. Another way in which families have changed is that kids have money. I suppose if I told you that we didn't have money when I was a kid, you would think that was on a par with walking uphill both ways to school, okay, that nostalgia from adult. But really, youngsters didn't carry money routinely. Our allowances were very, very small. I think part of the change actually relates to women entering the labor force, needing to make sure their kids have enough money to cover an emergency, or maybe feeling like they want to make up for not being home to do the milk and cookies thing after school. For whatever reason, teens aged 12 to 19 had spent $175 billion in 2003, an average of $103 a week apiece, and children 4 to 12 had spent about $40 billion. Now, these are not young people expressing their food preferences in a vacuum, okay? Factor into this $10 to $12 billion a year of food and beverage advertising targeted toward teens and children. Okay, these are not folks just going out there with the food preferences they've developed at home and purchasing. These are people being told that certain foods are cool, that certain foods will make them popular, that certain foods will make them attractive, you name it. I'm sure you've done analysis of the messages that are implicit in food advertising. Putting this together with what I was telling you about what was happening to the food service directors and the need to get those kids back in the cafeteria and keep the volume up. And you're probably familiar with the notion of a unit cost, but think about what goes into the unit cost of producing a school meal. The director's salary gets spread over all the kids who eat. So if your participation goes way down, the cost of producing any individual meal goes way up. Okay? So if you combine what was happening in the cafeteria funding crisis with this growth of money in the hands of students, of young people, it's easy to understand why we went through a kind of evolution in the attitude toward youngsters in the cafeteria from, I don't know, from children whose food intake needs to be guided and monitored to customers who are always right. Remember, Mrs. Mack wouldn't tolerate it? Mrs. Mack began to tolerate it. Mrs. Mack wanted to keep her job at least long enough to reach retirement. She began to permit. How many of you ever had a meal that was, say, a Cinnabon and a sports drink? Yeah, okay. Back there. That was the one that got me in the stories my UC Santa Cruz students told me. If there's time and questions and answers, we can come back to this because I really need to zip along before I lose your attention. I indicated that families have changed, food has changed, and the financing have changed, but there are also other federal policies that changed. I mentioned that the official meal in the cafeteria is designed to meet certain nutrition standards, and the original set of standards grew out of World War II. In World War II, the nation faced the possibility of food rationing. All through the 30s, food surpluses had been the primary agricultural policy issue. And now here we were with shortages. We needed food, our allies needed food, the troops needed food. Our economy was roaring to life with the munitions business. The government was contemplating rationing. Those were the basis for what were called school meal menu patterns. For 30 years was called the Type A meal, and it was a menu pattern that was designed with the intent to meet these ceilings, to make sure that there were enough calories in the school food, enough vitamin A, C, calcium, what have you. Well, come the mid-1990s, we began to realize that, well actually by the late 80s, that most of our diet-related diseases were not related to underconsumption. We don't have big outbreaks of rickets and scurvy in the United States anymore, but to overconsumption, to too much fat, too much salt, too much sugar, don't take it away from me, in our diet. And so a new set of dietary guidelines were promulgated, and these were the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. And in 1995, Congress passed a law that said school meals had to comply with the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. And this meant suddenly that that no more than 35% of, no more than 30% of calories could come from fat, or 10% from saturated fat. So it created a much narrower range for school food menu planners to plan menus that were compliant with the federal nutrition regulations. We moved from floors to ceilings, but we didn't get rid of the floors. The most, to me, the best example of the outcome of this was many schools moved from whole milk, which is 4% fat, to skim milk or 1% milk, so they got rid of a substantial source of fat calories, but then they didn't have enough calories because they still had that calorie floor. So then they added sweetened milks, strawberry milk, banana milk with high fructose corn syrup in it to get the calories back up so that they would meet this standard of no more than 30% of calories from fat.